Hello, welcome to week four's discussion. So this week we're going to talk about two important concepts in economics: elasticity and tax. And I do want to mention that a discussion this usually in the physical class we're going to do some summary of the lecture video. A summary of the lectures, and then give you some examples of maybe whatever questions you're going to be asked on the exams. But since now everything's online, and apparently the lecture videos can be much longer than in class lectures, so I watch lecture videos myself, and it's just almost impossible for me to summarize everything in the lecture videos, especially when you have two lecture videos each week, but you only have one discussion per week. So I always suggest you to watch the lecture videos first and then come back to the discussion video, because the discussion video is supposed to be I don't know, maybe more like a substitute, maybe more like a complementary to the lecture videos instead of a substitute. I don't know if you're doing this, because based on my experience from previous years, some students come to the discussions, ask me that, well, isn't this supposed to be, just if I come to the discussions, I should know all of the important materials from the lectures. That's not the case. Regardless if it's online or in class, you definitely want to watch the lecture videos first and then come to the discussion, because we only have limited time, and I usually try to give you some examples of the type of questions that we may ask you in the exams. So it's just impossible for me to summarize every single details. And again, I think it's easier for you to go to lectures now, right? Because everything's online and you can pause whenever you want. And if you don't understand any point, you can always go back and watch it again. So it's only easier. It's only easier now instead of harder. So definitely try to understand lecture materials first before you come to the discussion. And I do realize that many of you face I think many of you experience the technical issues, I don't know, system glitch from the lecture videos, lecture quizzes. Sorry, not lecture videos, lecture quizzes. And I do receive many emails asking me to change your grades, or regrade your grades, or whatever, regrade your quizzes or whatever. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't regrade it. I don't have access to see whatever questions you did or whatever questions you didn't do, because the system didn't record it, right? So definitely make sure that you read professor's instruction on how to solve this type of questions. Maybe change browser, maybe check your internet connection, maybe check if your VPN is stable. Just prepare well before you watch the lecture videos. Maybe don't pause for too long. Maybe try to watch it I don't know, smoothly, instead of pause every now and then, here and there. Especially don't pause before the quiz, or don't I don't know. I really don't know how. I understand that some of you may not have stable internet connection. I understand that, and I understand sometimes it's harder to realize where did it go wrong and why didn't the system record it. I don't understand either, because I'm not a technician. So I would suggest definitely try to fix the issues based on the instructions professors give you. Okay. And if that didn't work, the professor also told you how to take some pictures, try to leave some proofs, evidence when you email me, so I can regrade your quiz, or maybe change your grade based on the proofs. And if you don't have the proofs right now, because I think the instruction is only up there for maybe like past 2 weeks, so some of you experience the technical issues maybe from week 2 or maybe week 1. I don't know. It's okay, but follow the professor's step on how to email me. When you email me, include the length of your quiz, like how long did you take for you to finish the quiz, like around what time you started, around what time you finished, and how many questions you got correct. Again, this is totally based on your own honesty. Nobody can check if you really did that or not. So this is really just up to you. But also, as Professor mentioned, the more you do it, the less credible you are. So definitely make sure that try your best to solve the technical issues first, and then ask me to, if you still happens, then ask me to change your grade, or maybe just always take pictures of take some photos before you submit your quiz. Okay, so much for the lecture quiz. Let's get back to the lecture materials. So this week we're gonna look at text first. All right, last week we introduced the very basic graph in economics, supply and demand curve. And I mentioned that you want to label everything very clearly. You have a downward sloping demand curve and upward sloping supply curve. The intersection is the equilibrium quantity and price. Okay. But this is based on that there's no other forces, there's no other type of payments, there's no taxes occurring in this market. It's purely driven by the market itself, and we found this equilibrium price and quantity. What if there is a tax, right? Almost every government, I think all governments in this world is charging taxes to raise the government funds, right? So how do we make sense of that? How do we understand after we impose a tax, how the market is going to react, right? And who should pay the taxes? Are consumers paying taxes right now, or are suppliers paying taxes right now? And who is suffering more, quote unquote suffer, okay? And who is paying more? And when consumers are paying taxes, like us, when we go to grocery shopping, we always see on the receipt we are paying 7.5% of the sales tax, right? Are we the only ones who are paying the taxes? So the supermarkets or grocery stores, they don't pay anything? These are interesting questions, right? So let's look at it. Assume that consumers are paying taxes. So in this case, let's just make a very easy model to reflect what is happening in our real lives. Say we're doing grocery shopping and we are the ones who are paying taxes. Consumers are the ones who are only paying the taxes right now. Okay? Imagine it's just grocery. Whatever grocery you're thinking about. Okay? And we're the consumers, we're the ones who are only paying the taxes. How do we reflect it on the graph? If you still remember from last week, I mentioned that the change in the price results in movement along the curve, right? And that's actually exactly what happened here. A change in the price is a movement along the curve. But just to make everything more visual, let me just draw a shift first. Draw the shift first. Say we impose the $10 tax, okay, on each grocery. Let's say we're all the same. We're all homogeneous. We do the same grocery shopping. We buy the same stuff. We spend the same money on the grocery, and so we receive the same tax on the grocery. So the government imposed a $10 tax on the grocery shopping. Is that going to be a decrease or increase in the demand curve? Well, it should be a decrease, right? Because we know that when the price is getting higher, if we don't change the preference, we don't change the wealth, technically we are gonna pay we're gonna pay more, so we want to buy less, right? And again, I know this should be a movement, but just for this discussion, for the purpose of making everything visual, let's do a shift first. So this is the demand curve after tax. Okay. So the price we're paying seems like it's lower than before. Is that right? What is this price? Well, keep in mind that I mentioned there shouldn't be a shift in the demand curve. Alright, so this shouldn't be the price that we are paying. As consumers, I'm only shifting the curve So it's easier for me to identify the after-tax equilibrium quantity. Okay? So the Q tax is the after-tax equilibrium quantity. But this price, the intersection, is not what we are paying. Keep in mind that the demand curve didn't shift. So we want to find out the price we're paying, we have to go back to our original demand curve. So this is not the end of the story. We have to keep going up to this point. And the corresponding price is the price that we pay as consumers. I use PC to indicate that it's the price that's paying by the consumers, which is us. So this is the real price that is paid by the consumer. Then what about this P? What is it, right? Well, look at which curve is it on. So now I already found out after tax equilibrium price. I can remove this D-tax curve because again, it should never happen. The shift should never happen. I know it should be a movement along the curve, right? The shift should never happen. It was just only helping me to identify the quantity first. So technically, this price didn't exist on that demand curve. But look at which curve it does exist on. It's this curve, right? It's the supply curve. So what does it mean? It means this is the corresponding price paid by suppliers, PS. Whereas in the case, it's the supplier's price. So I'll give you a moment to let that sink in. Or just look at this graph. And you can realize, wait a second. In the assumption that we know consumers are the ones who are only paying the taxes. But on the graph, even though the consumers are still the ones who are paying all the taxes, but suppliers only receive PS. And look at PS. PS is less than P star. What is the P star again? It's the market equilibrium price before tax, right? So before the tax, consumer will pay P star to the suppliers, and suppliers will receive P star. But now, after the tax, consumers are paying PC, which is higher than the market equilibrium price, right? So consumers paying more. Yet producers are receiving less, or suppliers are receiving less. So nominally, it looks like consumers are the only ones who are paying the taxes. But when you look deeper into the issue, both of the parties, regardless you're the buyers or the suppliers or the sellers, you both suffer the tax. But when I suffer, I don't mean tax is a bad thing. I only just want, you get it. You both bear the tax, okay? So even though, again, the assumption is consumers are paying the taxes alone, but when you look into the issues deeper, everyone is paying the tax, regardless you're a buyer or the seller. Now we have to decide who is paying more, though. Do we pay it equally? It doesn't seem so. I don't think you have learned consumer surplus and the supplier's surplus yet, but let me just briefly cover that a little bit. So I already know the tax is $10, so at least I know that PC minus PS should be $10. That's where the government steps in and charge the tax, impose the tax. And looks like that consumers in this case are paying something less. Just look at this small area, right? when suppliers are suffering a little bit more. But why is that? And again, you don't need to understand this yet. You don't need to understand the consumer supplies that will lost tax revenue yet. I think we're gonna cover it next week, or maybe on Thursday's lecture videos. But you already, from the graph, you can already see someone is paying more, someone is paying less, right? And why is that? Well, it all goes back to elasticity. Elasticity can decide who is paying more in the tax and who is paying less. But keep in mind, when we're talking about who is paying more and who is paying less, it doesn't matter who we impose this tax on, okay? Regardless, we're imposing the tax on the consumers or we're imposing the tax on the sellers. Regardless who we're imposing this tax on, everyone needs to pay the tax, one way or another. In this case, seems like consumers are the only ones who are paying the tax, but as we already mentioned again and again, sellers are also paying the tax in a different way by receiving less money, right? So now we know that everyone is paying the tax. We just want to figure out who pays more and who pays less. And like I said, it all goes back to elasticity. Let me draw out another supply and demand curve. And this time, I want to have a very elastic demand curve. And you should know that this is a very elastic demand curve already, right? Because in lecture videos, we showed you that the more elastic it is, the less steeper the slope of the demand curve, right? So this is a very elastic demand curve and a somewhat inelastic supply curve. All right, and we still assume this is grocery shopping. We still assume the $10 tax, and we still assume that everything's the same. Consumers are paying the taxes, so we use the same old trick. And again, I forgot to label everything clearly. And again, we use the old trick to shift. Again, this demand curve doesn't exist, but let me still draw it out. We'll shift it first to determine the after tax quantity. And we use this point, goes back to the original demand curve to find out the real after tax price that consumers are paying, PC. And now I can remove this curve and I know the corresponding point on the supply curve will help us to find out the price that supplier is paying. Price that supplier is receiving, right? And look at this graph. Even though consumers are paying everything, $10, and we already know that suppliers are also paying. So PC minus PS is $10 tax. But apparently, in this case, maybe this graph isn't as clear yet, but but the second graph is pretty clear now, right? Who is paying more and who is paying less. PC minus P star. PC minus P star is definitely going to be less than P star minus PS, right? So who is paying more? Suppliers are paying more. Why is that? Well, the more elastic you are, demand of supply curve is, the less tax demand of supply bear. And if you don't believe this, we can draw it in a different situation. Still the same assumption. But this time, let me draw the very inelastic demand curve. But the somewhat elastic supply curve. Corresponding market equilibrium price and quantity. And again, everything's the same. Consumers paying all $10 tax, blah, blah, blah. And by this point, you should be very familiar how to draw the, how to find out the after-tax quantity. And the corresponding consumer's price. And corresponding supplier's price. Right? And again, PC minus PS is the $10 tax, no surprise here, but look at this. Apparently, demand curve is very inelastic in this case, and supply curve is very elastic in this case. And look at who is bearing more taxes here. Consumers, right? Consumers are paying more taxes. PC minus P star is definitely greater than P star minus PS. Right? So that's how we combine elasticity and tax together to, summarize everything you learned from the last week's lectures. And the possible questions could be, I don't know. Again, you don't need to draw graphs anymore in the exam. So what I would think maybe is, based on this type of questions, could be, we told you who has the more who has more elasticity, which curve has more elasticity, and let you decide who is paying more taxes. And definitely, it's also possible for us to ask you to how to calculate elasticity of supply curve or demand curve, where the formula is already given in the lecture videos. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for this week's discussion. And if you have any questions, you can always, email me or set up a time to meet me in the office hour. And that's it. I will see you next week.